Get the stories firsthand as they happen, where they happen. We bring the information to you undiluted, verified, accurate, balanced, and without bias. Told from the human angle perspective. We interview the actors and the experts. All facts laid bare. From Nigeria to the rest of the globe, we deliver the news on time and in time. This is Globe 5 on Adamimogo 93.1 FM, Lekki, Lagos.
Good afternoon. This is Globe 5 on Adamimogo 93.1 FM, Lagos. I'm Ayo Adekeye, headline. Atiku Obi others speak at INEC office over decision to derecognize David Mark's ADC. Ramaphosa calls for further dialogue to end US-Iran conflict. Trump meets NATO chief after temporary ceasefire deal amid rising tensions. Now the news in detail. We begin with politics in Nigeria, where Atiku Abubakar, Peter Obi, Rabiu Kwankwaso and David Mark have joined other prominent members of the African Democratic Congress ADC for protests at Baitama roundabout in Federal Capital Territory. The protest is against the Independent National Electoral Commission INEC's decision not to recognize either the David Mark-led leadership or Nafiu Balogun, who's laying claim to party leadership.
We not go agree. We not go agree. Oh, we not go agree. We not go agree. We not go agree. Oh, we not go agree.
Last week, INEC withdrew recognition from the interim national chairman, Senator Mark, and the national secretary, Ralph Arigweshola, following the judgment of the Court of Appeal. A move the David Mark-led ADC described as premeditated to disqualify the party from contesting the 2027 general election. Outside Nigeria now, President Cyril Ramaphosa says the war in the Middle East can only end permanently if the parties involved respect individual sovereignty and dialogue over force. Ramaphosa said this while receiving credentials from several ambassadors in Pretoria, noting that ambassadors should never criticize their hosts publicly and in a confrontational manner.
We welcome the announcement of a ceasefire and are hopeful that it will lay the basis for a permanent resolution of the conflict. South Africa once again calls for dialogue and mediation to prevent further loss of life and to ensure a just and sustainable and lasting peace. We further call on all countries to respect international law and the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all nations in the world.
Ramaphosa further stated that South Africa seeks a global order defined by peace and friendship among all the nations of the world.
We seek a global order defined by peace and friendship amongst all nations of the world. We seek a world order where the gulf between inequality amongst nations is narrowed, where nations of the world make a commitment to stand united against racism, colonialism, subjugation, and all forms of oppression and intolerance. This stance is born out of our own history. We strive to ensure that global peace and security is secured through dialogue and negotiation and not through force of arms.
His statement follows a row with U.S. Ambassador in Pretoria, Leo Brent Bozell, who was recently demarched after he made comments about South Africa's domestic affairs. From South Africa to Somalia, where the leaders of northeastern Somalia's semi-autonomous Puntland region, Said Abdullahi Deni, has ordered regional forces to remain on high alert and prepare for a possible offensive by the federal government. Deni said development in other federal member states could be replicated in Puntland, warning of a scenario similar to the one in which Southwest State leader Adiasis Laftagan was toppled. He accused President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud of seeking to centralize power and dismantle the federal system that has been in place in Somalia for 2 decades. His remarks suggested concern over potential efforts by the federal government to weaken the region's security apparatus, including attempts to win over elements within it ahead of any move to unseat the administration. And in the north of Africa, Morocco's security forces have dismantled a 6-member terrorist cell during coordinated raids in Casablanca, Kenitra, Sidi Taibi, and Dail Gadari region of Sidi Khartoum province. According to a statement released by the Central Bureau of Judicial Investigation, the cell is accused of raiding livestock farms near Kenitra and Sidi Salman, then reselling the stolen goods in markets across the Safi and Sidi Benoit provinces. During the operation, authorities seized extremist manuscripts, bladed weapons, and significant sum of Moroccan dirhams believed to be criminal proceeds. Officers also confiscated equipment used in the robberies, including a balaclava glove, a motorcycle, 2 vans used for transporting stolen livestock. The BCU, operating under the General Directorate of Territorial Surveillance, confirmed that the suspects remain in custody. Now, outside Africa, Greece Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has announced that the country will ban access to social media for children under the age of 15 from January 1, 2027. In a video message addressed to young people, Mitsotakis said children spending long hours in front of screens do not allow their minds rest and face growing pressure from constant comparison and online comments. According to him, many parents have reported that their children do not sleep well, become anxious easily, and spend long hours on their phones. Slovenia, Britain, Austria, and Spain have also said they're working on similar bans after Australia became the first country in the world to block access to children under 16 last year. We're listening to Globe File on Adami Mogo 93.1 FM Lagos. Still to come, Trump meets NATO chief after temporary ceasefire deal amid rising tension.
You can listen to Adami Mogo 93.1 FM from any part of the world. Download the Adami Mogo 931 FM app from Google Play Store and Radio Garden, and follow us on Adami Mogo 93.1 FM on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you have eyewitness stories or exclusive to share, contact the Adami Mogo FM newsroom via mail at newsroom@adamimogofm.com, or you can dial 070-634-03583. You can dial 090-319-69629. Adami Mogo 93.1 FM Lagos, voice of the light.
Thank you for staying with us, and now to the rest of the stories. In the Middle East, U.S. President Donald Trump agreed to a 2-week ceasefire with Iran less than 2 hours before its deadline for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face devastating attacks. The announcement late yesterday represented an abrupt turnaround from his extraordinary warning earlier in the day, when he said the whole civilization may die if his demands were not met. Pakistan's military chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, and his Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, helped mediate the ceasefire, inviting Iranian and U.S. delegations to meet in Islamabad on Friday. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said in a statement Tehran would cease counterattacks and provide safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz if attacks against it stopped. Iran's Supreme National Security Council also portrayed the deal as a victory over the U.S., saying Trump had accepted Iran's conditions for ending hostilities, and celebrations broke out in Tehran. And now President Trump welcomed NATO chief Mark Rutte to the White House today, as the war with Iran has pushed U.S. retaliations with other members of the military alliance to a crisis point. The Republican president had threatened to withdraw from the 32-member transatlantic alliance and denounced Washington's European allies in recent week for what is said was inadequate support for the U.S.-Israeli bombing campaign in Iran. When the two men meet, Rutte is likely to address a shared interest in restoring normalcy to maritime trade. He is also expected to attempt to sway the U.S. leader away from public criticism of the alliance, what outing steps European countries are taking to increase defense spending. In a separate development, French President Emmanuel Macron has welcomed the ceasefire between Iran and the U.S., but said the situation in Lebanon remained critical and called for Lebanon to be included in the deal. Macron explains that the ceasefire should be consolidated to ensure that the Strait of Hormuz remains open and protected.
We have said it repeatedly since the beginning of this conflict. It is indeed through negotiation that we can provide the security guarantees necessary for stability throughout the region. Therefore, the announcement of this ceasefire is very good news. Regarding the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has announced its readiness to reopen it, which is a positive development. We have been working for several weeks to mobilize our partners in Asia, Europe, and the region to enable the implementation of a strictly defensive mission in coordination with Iran when the conditions are right to facilitate the resumption of maritime traffic.
Speaking during a meeting with defense advisors and members of his cabinet, Macron advocated an extension of the ceasefire deal to Lebanon.
Pour permettre de faciliter sur le Liban.
Regarding Lebanon, which, to date, is also included in the ceasefire, which is a good thing and even an essential thing, and where the strikes have ceased in recent hours, the situation is critical. Allow me to say one last word before we begin the work of this council, to welcome the release of Cécile Kohler and Jacques Paris, and the profound relief it brings to all of us. I will have the opportunity to meet with them later this morning. This marks the end of a terrible ordeal lasting 3.5 years, and I want to take this opportunity to thank the Omani authorities for their mediation efforts.
Netanyahu's office had earlier stated that he supported the U.S. decision to suspend strikes against Iran for 2 weeks, but the ceasefire did not include Lebanon. Now to sport, where there will be at least 5 Premier League teams in the Champions League next season after Arsenal beats Sporting Lisbon on Tuesday. As part of the new format for Europe's elite club competition, the two nations which perform best across UEFA tournament are handed European performance spots by UEFA. Arsenal, Tottenham, Man City, Chelsea and Liverpool all finished in the top 8 in the Champions League, the league phase, and Newcastle won their knockout round playoff, while Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest are in the quarterfinals of the Europa League. Crystal Palace are also in the last 8 of the Conference League. Meanwhile, the Premier League had 6 spots in the Champions League this season after Tottenham won the Europa League, and that could be the case again in the coming season. So entertainment, where actor Aubrey Plaza is reportedly pregnant with her first child just over a year after the death of her estranged husband, filmmaker Jeffa Benet. The White Lotus star is understood to be having the baby with her partner Christopher Abbott, with the child due in the autumn. Prior to the pregnancy, Plaza had kept a relationship with Abbott largely out of the spotlight. Reports of the relationship first began to circulate in mid-2025 when the pair were reportedly seen together at Chatham Berry Farm in upstate New York. And before we bring Glove out to an end, here's a recap of the biggest stories. I told you Atiku Abubakar, Peter Obi, Rabiu Kwankwaso and David Mark have joined other prominent members of the ADC for protest against INEC over the recognition of the David Mark-led leadership of the party. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says the war in the Middle East can only end permanently if the parties involved respect individual sovereignty and dialogue over force. Finally, we told you Trump welcomed NATO chief Mark Rutte to the White House today after announcing a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, less than 2 hours before its deadline for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That's Clip 5. Join us at 2 o'clock for more stories on The Briefing on Adami Mogo 93.1 FM Lagos. I'm Ayo